I guess while Dr. Scott gets her slides up and going. This is part of the Duane Jeffrey series on evolution and religion. Dr. Jeffrey is here with us. Very delighted to honor him for a remarkable career that continues to be remarkable. Dr. Scott, since 1987, has been Executive Director of the National Center for Science Education, which is a pro-evolution, non-science, or not, excuse me, pro-evolution, non-profit science.
Most science is actually non-profit.
Scientific organizations. With members in every state. She holds a PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Missouri and honorary doctoral of science degrees from a number of other universities. She's received numerous awards, which I won't take the time to read, only to mention that they are very prestigious. Among them, the recent one that the University of California gave her the University of California San Francisco Medal, which is their highest honor. She has taught at the University of Kentucky and the University of Colorado, and is a human biologist, and her research was in medical anthropology and skeletal biology. She is author of Creationism and Evolution, an Introduction, and co-editor with Glenn Branch of Not in Our Classrooms, Why Intelligent Design is Wrong for Our Schools. In addition to numerous published papers and monographs, she has served as chair of the Ethics Committee of the American Anthropological Association and as president of the American Association of Physical Anthropologists. And she has chaired both the anthropology and education sections of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the largest scientific organization in the United States. Dr. Scott has worked nationwide to communicate the scientific method to the general public and to improve how science as a way of knowing is taught in schools. She is frequently called upon by print, radio, and television media as a spokesperson for the scientific view when conflicts arise between scientific and pseudoscientific expectations. We're very delighted to welcome Dr. Scott on the UVU campus with this joint symposium between Utah Valley University and Brigham Young University. And before she starts, we would like to make a quick award to her.
Oh my goodness.
You may be aware this is the 200th anniversary of Darwin's birth and the 150th of his publication of Origin of Species. This is an original drawing of Darwin at the time that he wrote the Origin of Species.
Well, thank you.
Who drew that? By whom? Yeah, I drew it.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm even more impressed. There's that chalk drawing there, but this is great. Thank you so much. Wow, this is great. I was so busy, trying to get everything to work here. I didn't notice there's a little stack of stuff down here. Right in front of me. The best place to hide things is right in plain sight, as we all know. Well, the title of my talk is What Will the Creationists Do Next? And of course, what I'm talking about is the creationism and evolution controversy. And what I find when I go around the country and talk to people about evolution, or go on AM radio talk shows, people really don't understand what evolution is. So I'm going to take a very, very short little digression from the matter at hand here and just tell you what I mean by evolution, so that at least we're talking about the same thing. Ideally, then this is going to work when I hit the space bar, or not. Let's try this. Well, let's see. Let's see if we can get it to work this way. Well, so far so good, except for the fact, there you go. The big idea of evolution is what Darwin called descent with modification. The idea that there has been a change in the universe through time, a change in organisms through time, specifically in biological evolution, common ancestry. Living things have descended with modification from common ancestry. That is the big idea of evolution. And we study evolution two ways. We talk about the processes or mechanisms of evolution, how it is that evolution takes place, and obviously natural selection, which was Darwin's big idea, is the main engine of evolutionary change. But it's always important to know that it's not the only one. There are other ways that evolution takes place as well. The other way we study evolution is looking at the pattern of evolution. How does the tree of life branch through time? What's the relationship between birds and dinosaurs? What's the relationship between humans and the other apes, and so forth? What's the relations between lions and tigers? How does the tree of life branch through time? Now, interestingly enough, the big idea of evolution, of common ancestry, is independent of the mechanism and the pattern, when you think about it. If you talk to your professors around here, there are some scientists who are working on mechanisms of evolution. They generally don't pay a whole lot of attention to the fossil record. There are other scientists who are working on phylogenies. They're working on trying to understand the tree of life. They tend not to worry a whole lot about natural selection or evo-devo and so forth and so on. The kinds of data that we use to study how evolution takes place in terms, in the sense of the mechanisms or processes of evolution, are a different kind of data, they're a different set of data than the data that we use to explain how the tree of life has branched through time. If indeed, as most paleontologists agree, birds are descended from dinosaurs, it doesn't matter whether it was natural selection or drift or whatever mechanism it was. You decide that the birds are evolved dinosaurs based on different kinds of data than somebody who, for example, is looking at gophers or, prairie dogs in this part of the country, and how they're adapting to their local environment, in which case you're talking about things like natural selection or other microevolutionary processes. So, evolution, pattern, and process. I bring this up because one of the concentrations that you find in the creationist literature is a lot of confusion among these three ideas. You'll find creationists pointing at disputes among scientists about, say, the power of natural selection as an evolutionary mechanism. And they'll point to those arguments about the details of evolution as if they were evidence against the big idea of common ancestry. Creationists will point at disputes among scientists about the pattern of evolution, about whether dinosaurs and birds shared a common ancestor or whether dinosaurs gave rise to birds, and they'll say, see, evolution didn't take place. These are category errors. Whether or not pattern arguments or process arguments, however they are resolved among the professionals in the field, is unrelated to the idea of whether or not living things had common ancestors, because for that kind of conclusion we have lots and lots and lots of other kinds of evidence. But we do have a real problem in the United States with the acceptance of evolution. And this varies, we stand out, shall we say, from other developed and even some not so developed countries in this particular concern. This is an article by Miller, Scott, and Okamoto. I actually, full disclosure here, this is all John Miller's data. I basically helped with the interpretation. He did all the hard work. It's a very, Science Magazine says that this diagram is the most frequently requested illustration from Science Magazine in the last 3 years. They asked, humans evolved from earlier forms of animal, true or false? And this question was asked of adult citizens of a number of countries. Blue is agree, red is disagree, yellow is don't know. And before you go down trying to find us, we beat Turkey.
Here's the microphone.
Oh, how about that? You want me to do too? That's probably a good idea. Can you hear me better now? Thank you very much. Some more recent cross-national data was conducted by the British Council in their Darwin Now study earlier this year, in which they asked adults in a variety of countries, enough scientific evidence exists to support Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, true or false, and these are the numbers that you get. I guess you can't see that terribly well because the screen is really tiny because of all the problems that we had with the, actually, Oh, never mind. Let's just leave well enough alone. Okay. India, 77%. China, 72%. And before you go down, you're looking for the United States. We beat Egypt. So clearly, compared to other developed countries, the United States stands out in the percentage of its population that does not accept evolution. The differences are even stronger when you compare. Excuse me, what's going on here? The differences are even stronger when you compare the attitudes of scientists compared to the attitudes of, here we go, of members of the general public. And just to highlight this top figure for you, the question, humans and other living things have evolved over time. 61% of the public in this Pew Foundation study agreed. 97% of the scientists agreed. The scientist comes from AAAS, and the general public is a general usual stratified subject.
Are those people who self-identify as scientists?
They are members of AAAS, and they self-identify as scientists. Generally speaking, the people who belong to AAAS, that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science, considering it costs so much money to join, it tends not just to be, the shopkeeper down the street. Although they're welcome, if they really like science. But these are card-carrying scientists, if you will. Now, sometimes data like these that show lots and lots and lots of scientists accepting evolution, sometimes data like these are used to imply that all scientists are atheists, and that really is a misunderstanding. In these data, the question was asked, do you believe in God or a higher power, or neither? The top line is what I want you to focus on. All scientists, 51% believe in God and a higher power. 41% of scientists in this poll believe in neither. Now, the percentage of scientists who believe in God or a higher power is lower than that in the general public, certainly. But by no means should this be used to imply or infer that therefore all scientists are atheists. This is simply not the case. But we certainly have had plenty of anti-evolutionism in the news, including a long time ago. This is a clipping from 1924 from my state of California. And we have all sorts of things going on, like stickers being put into textbooks disclaiming evolution, or stickers being taken out, as in this case in Beebe, Arkansas. And indeed, anti-evolutionism is long-standing in the United States. In the early part of the 20th century, anti-evolutionists tried to ban evolution. In the Scopes trial, which was over a Tennessee law that banned the teaching of human evolution, they succeeded. People forget that Scopes last, and the anti-evolution laws stayed on the books, but more importantly, the textbook authors began quickly to take evolution out of the high school textbooks. There was actually more evolution in high school textbooks before the 1925 Scopes trial than afterwards, which is sort of an interesting little historical point. And in fact, evolution stayed out of the textbooks until the improvements in the high school biology curriculum of the Sputnik era. At this time, the National Science Foundation put a lot of money into developing high school science textbooks, including biology textbooks. And the new biology textbooks did include evolution because they were written by professional scientists, and professional scientists accept evolution. However, Arkansas still had one of these anti-evolution laws on the books. And Susan Epperson, who is a 25-year-old high school biology teacher in Little Rock, was asked to be a plaintiff in what was assumed to be just sort of a housekeeping trial at the state level that would just tidy up the legal statute so that this pesky anti-evolution law would be taken away and the teachers could then feel free to use these new textbooks and, it would be fine. Well, much to her surprise, this case ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court, and Epperson versus Arkansas in 1968 struck down anti-evolution laws such as John Scopes had been tried under. Susan Epperson today is a community college chemistry and biology teacher living in Colorado Springs. Her daughter is an evolutionary biologist. Her son is a Presbyterian minister. This clearly is not a family that has problems with science and religion. This caused the evolution, if you will, of something called creation science. Now, in the 1960s, because of the changes in the textbooks, evolution was coming back into the textbooks, it was coming back into the classroom, and this did not please anti-evolutionists who, for the last 30 years or so, since about the Scopes trial, had not had to worry about evolution. So, because evolution couldn't be banned, they struggled for a way to try to bring it into the classroom. And something called creation science was developed in the early to mid-1960s as a way of presenting what was basically a biblical literalist perspective as science, to justify teaching it alongside of evolution in the schools. The argument was, well, if you teach evolution, a lot of people out there don't like evolution, so balance it out by teaching creation science. It turned out, of course, as I'll illustrate, that creation science really was a form of specific sectarian Christian religion, and advocating it in the public schools turned out to be unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court, in a case called Edwards versus Aguilar, declared that such equal time for creation science laws, I'm sorry, excuse me, I jumped ahead. That's the problem with all this rushing around at the last minute. And because my brain's gone anyway, whatever. During the 1970s and the early 80s, there were many efforts to try to get states to pass legislation requiring that if evolution was taught, you had to teach this creation science to balance it out. And these cases were taken to court, and in 1987, the Supreme Court ruled that these kinds of laws were unconstitutional. Let me tell you a little bit about creation science. Creation science is based upon a Christian theological view called special creationism. Now, obviously, all Christians believe that God created, but special creationism is a particular view of how God created. And the way God created, according to this view, is pretty much as you see in the literal interpretation of Genesis. So God creates everything in its present form. And this is the whole universe. I mean, it's galaxies, it's the solar system, it's the planet Earth, it's plants and animals on Earth. There's been a little bit of change hither and yon over the since the creation event. But by and large, if you were to go back in the past, you'd see pretty much what you see today. In terms of biology, special creation argues that God creates kinds of organisms, as it says in the Bible, with limited genetic variation and no relationship between the kinds. So you can have evolution within a kind, but you can't have change from one kind to another. Kind is not a scientific term, needless to say. You might have the cat kind, and the cat kind would be defined as including lions and tigers and cougars and bobcats and house cats and various kinds of cat-like creatures. But there would be no common ancestor between the dog kind and the cat kind. There wouldn't be a common carnivore ancestor in the special creation point of view. In the most common form of special creation views, this creation event took place at one time during the 6 24-hour days of Genesis creation. But that is not the most important feature, because there also are special creationists known as progressive creationists who accept that the earth is very old, but believe that God created sequentially through time. So therefore the geologic column is accurate. First, God created single-celled organisms, then He created simple metazoa, then more complicated metazoa, and then we got around to vertebrates, and then lions and tigers and bears, and on it goes. And so the idea of special creation of animals is what is more important than whether the event took place at one time or over a period of time. Creation of things in its present form is really the heart of special creationism. Well, the most common kind of creation science is something, is a young earth form of creationism in which the argument is made that the earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And prominent in these creation science views is something called flood geology, in which Noah's flood is responsible for the shape of the planet, basically. Well, not the shape of the planet, but all of the sedimentary deposits in the planet, and for mountains and for oceans and everything else. The argument is made that the whole planet was covered with water, just as in a literal view of Genesis, and that the receding waters of the flood laid down all of the sediments of every part of the planet, and then post-flood activities of continental drift or volcanoes or whatever shaped the mountain ranges and characteristics of the planet that we see today, including Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is a favorite of the one with creation from the Institute for Creation Research, recently moved to Dallas, Texas. Steve Austin is the author of a book called Grand Canyon, Monument to Catastrophe, which I'm holding there. Not that Steve Austin. The same name. And by the way, that is not a smile on my face. Those are clenched teeth. I'm saying, take the picture really fast because I'm about to slide down that hill right into a very, very cold Colorado River. We have a Grand Canyon trip every year, and we are very dependent upon Grand Canyon Monument to Catastrophe for presenting the creationist view. Basically, just to take the Grand Canyon as an example, the basement schists and granites in this view are the pre-flood. This is sort of the original creation week. The Grand Canyon itself is the early flood. The sediments above Grand Canyon forming the Colorado Plateau, the Grand Staircase, they are late flood and post-flood. Needless to say, geologists have looked at these claims and have rejected them pretty swiftly for not matching any kind of recognizable geology. In general, what you find with the creation science position is something that they call the two-model approach, in which there are only two possibilities. There is either special creationism or there is evolution. Most of the literature of creation science is devoted to disproving that evolution took place, which leaves by default special creation winning. If you look at the literature, there is very, very little that supports the positive view that everything appeared all at one time, that living things were created as specially created kinds, and so forth. Obviously, it's very difficult to find those data, and what happens instead is cherry-picking through the scientific data to try to find those little anomalies that don't seem to fit with the idea of common ancestry, and holding those out as, aha, therefore evolution didn't happen. I want to be sure that you understand that scientists have looked at these claims. It's not that they have been ignored. There's, in fact, a very large literature evaluating the claims of the one-earth creationists and also the intelligent design proponents. And they simply do not match what we know from science. If these views are believed in because of religious reasons, fine. But if you're saying they're science, then they have to accord with what we know from the scientific disciplines of astronomy and geology and biology and anthropology. And they simply do not. The data are not there to support them. Well, because we're really running short here, I'm going to zip ahead because we don't want to be here all day. I mentioned Edwards versus Aguilard was the Supreme Court decision that struck down equal time for creation science laws. That was actually 1987, but even before 1987, in the early to mid-1980s, it was clear that creation science was not being very persuasive. Number one, because of its biblical literalist stress. It wasn't appealing to Catholics and mainstream Protestants. It only appealed to the biblical literalist component of American Christianity. And because of its reliance upon the Bible for so much of its support, it also was very likely to run into problems with the First Amendment, which calls for public schools to be religiously neutral. And in fact, this is exactly what happened with the equal time laws. Creation science was shown to be a religious idea. Advocating in the public schools was advocating a religious idea, therefore it was unconstitutional to teach these ideas. So what happened was a group of anti-evolutionists, including some one-earth creationists and some old-earth creationists, began working in the middle 1980s to try to come up with some alternatives to creation science that wouldn't have those particular shortcomings of not being generally attractive to Christians and also having such severe problems with the First Amendment. A series of books were written, and probably the book on top there, the book called The Mystery of Life's Origin, is the clearest statement of what came to be called intelligent design. Now, The Mystery of Life's Origin is a book about the origin of life, which is a very difficult scientific problem. It is absolutely correct that scientists at this point do not have an agreement on a step-by-step natural origin of life, from inorganic molecules to organic molecules, although that part's pretty well done. From inorganic molecules to something that replicates, although we've got some pieces of that, from something that replicates within a membrane, although we've got some pieces of that, to something that you could call a primitive cell. We've got little bits and pieces, but absolutely, scientists are not going to stand up and tell you, we know the whole story. We don't. It's a tough issue. The perspective taken in Mystery of Life's Origin, however, is not just that it's an unsolved problem or that it's a difficult problem. The perspective taken in this book is that it's unsolvable, that it should simply be taken off the table as something that is just too hard for science to deal with. Of course, science deals with explaining things through natural causes. And the argument being made in this book is that because of the complexity of that first replicating structure within a membrane, whatever that first life would be, because of the incredible complexity of even the simplest imaginable cell, there could not be any natural explanation for it. Therefore, some form of intelligence must be called upon to explain the origin of life. Eugenie in the foreword wrote, "It is fundamentally implausible that unassisted matter and energy organize themselves into living systems." In other words, some form of intelligence had to come in. Now, we all know the intelligence buzz is named with 3 letters. This is very much what William Paley was talking about back in the early 1800s. You know Paley, he's the guy with the heath, right? You're walking along the heath, you see a rock, you don't think 2 things about it, it's a perfectly natural thing, it's a simple structure, could have been there forever, no big deal. If you see a pocket watch on the heath, well, you know because of the complexity of that watch and because of the way that all the springs and the wires and the glass and all these different components are fit together so very cleverly to achieve the purpose of telling time, you know from the complexity of that watch there had to be a watchmaker. When you see a vertebrate eye, which is a very complex structure, it's got wires and springs, well, not exactly, but it's sort of the equivalent. It's got a lot of different components that working together allow light into the brain and image formation and so forth. It's a very complicated structure. What Paley said was when you see something like the vertebrate eye, there could not possibly have been a natural cause to produce something this complicated, therefore there must be a God. The design argument is an apologetic. It's an argument for the existence of God. And it was ultimately a religious argument. Darwin, by the way, thought it was really a good argument until he came up with natural selection. Because what natural selection does is provide a natural way for really complicated structures to be gradually built up from very small structures. And this was the real, we're talking about our friend Darwin, this was the real revolution in 1859. This was the thing that really set people back on their heels. Not so much the idea of common ancestry, but the fact that a natural explanation could provide this wonderful complexity that we see in biological organisms without requiring the direct hand of God. And of course, what happened to clerics in the late 1800s in Great Britain and also in the United States is they just decided that that was fine. God still was in charge. God invented natural selection. It's not that God had nothing to do with it. They could live with natural selection and they could live with evolution. Since then, of course, there has been a bit more of a problem. So this is basically what intelligent design is all about. Things that are really complicated, like the vertebrate eye, like the bacterial flagellum motor, things that are the blood clotting cascade, things that are really complicated cannot have a natural explanation. They must be explained by intelligence, in other words, God. Intelligent design is defined by its proponents, such as William Dembski, as three things: a scientific research program that investigates the effects of intelligent causes, an intellectual movement that challenges Darwinism and its naturalistic legacy, and a way of understanding divine action. Well, two of these are maybe very interesting things from a theological or philosophical standpoint, but from a scientific standpoint, there's only one claim that the intelligent design people are making that scientists are going to care about as scientists. What is the science of intelligent design? Well, it's pretty thin. It basically consists of two ideas. One idea is Michael Behe's concept of irreducible complexity, which he described in his book Darwin's Black Box, and another one is William Dembski's design inference, or sometimes referred to as complex specified information. Now, these are basically the same kind of thing. Irreducible complexity is an argument that, like I said, really complicated things that all require, very complicated structures like the vertebrate eye, in which you have to have all the pieces together before it works, cannot be explained by the incremental process of natural selection. It can only be explained by having been assembled, so to speak, all at one time, like a carburetor. What Behe calls a purposeful assembly of parts. The design inference by Bill Dembski is the same sort of thing, except stated in terms of probability rather than complexity. And we don't really have time to go into this in detail. What I will say, however, is that both irreducible complexity and the design inference have been well disposed of in several analyses, easily available in book form and on the web and in articles. And, again, scientists have looked at the arguments of the intelligent design proponents. They were not dismissed out of hand. The arguments were examined and were found wanting because the claims of the intelligent design proponents are simply wrong. Now, many people will say that, well, but there are scientists. Mike Behe has a PhD in chemistry, and he published in the peer-reviewed literature. He's studied about protein folding, and he's a legitimate scientist. Bill Dembski is a mathematician. There are other people who have science credentials. So, why can't their views be taught in the schools? Well, of course, the first confusion is that, as the somewhat cynical statement of lawyers, for every PhD there is an equal and opposite PhD. That's not actually how it works. When you look at the number of scientists that support intelligent design versus the number of scientists who accept evolution, scientists from every nation, scientists from many different disciplines, it just is ludicrous to think that this is actually some sort of comparison that makes any sense whatsoever. For every PhD, there is not an equal and opposite PhD. The huge preponderance of scientific opinion is that intelligent design is merely a disguised form of creation science. But let's take a quick look at it. In order to be a science, a position has to be testable. Let's just take a quick look at the testability of intelligent design on the topics that we're interested in. Evolution is considered a valid science. Evolution has a historical narrative. Living things had common ancestors. The pattern of evolution is a branching tree of life. The process of evolution, we have a very good series of laws that we can cite that explain the processes of change. Creation science also has a historical narrative. Special creation. God created living things as designed kinds. Creation science also has a pattern. There's variation within the kinds. And creation science also has a process in the sense of God's direct intervention and then microevolution within the kinds. If you look at intelligent design, it has no historical narrative, it has no pattern, it has no process. Intelligent design learned from creation science not to make fact claims or make the absolute minimum of fact claims. When you make fact claims like Grand Canyon was cut by Noah's flood, you get tested and you get shown wrong. If you just have a very vague, this is really complicated, therefore God must have done it, that's a little harder to deal with. But if you look at the claims of, say, the bacteria flagellum being irreducibly complex, that is a fact claim, and when that claim was investigated, that claim was shown to be false. By and large, though, they made very few fact claims, which really makes it a very difficult to test position. Schematically, if we look at intelligent design, they're saying that specified complexity and reducible complexity, these two basic scientific ideas of ID, can either be the result of chance or natural selection or intelligent design. Now, even scientists are not claiming that structural complexity is the result of chance. Nobody says that the vertebrate eye, all of the various proteins and components of the vertebrate eye just sort of accidentally bump together. Nobody's making that claim. But the intelligent design people also say that natural selection can't produce this kind of structural complexity. So therefore, intelligent design wins. Now, first of all, they're wrong about natural selection, and there's a very large literature explaining why that is the case, and why the claims about natural selection being unable or incapable of producing structural complexity are just simply ignorant and wrong. But even given that, they are leaving out the possibility that there could be other evolutionary mechanisms that might explain structural complexity. And as scientists, we always have to say there may be causes that we don't know yet. In fact, one of the things that drives students crazy about scientists is that you ask us the question and half the time we say, I don't know yet. And what we tend to do is just suspend judgment if we don't at the time have an explanation. Because maybe 5 years from now or maybe 45 minutes from now, we might have that instrumentation, we might have that theory, we might have that observation that would allow us to explain that phenomenon that we can't understand yet. So the tendency is not to do what they do here in intelligent design, which is basically the two-model approach. Disproving evolution proves intelligent design. No, that's very faulty logic. And that's simply not a position that we can support. Well, then there was, of course, the small school district in Pennsylvania called Dover, which the school board voted in a policy requiring the teaching of intelligent design. A group of parents sued because they didn't want a sectarian religious view to be taught to their students in science class. The judge ruled that intelligent design was not science and it was unconstitutional to teach it, and after to find a point on it, granted the plaintiffs $2 million in legal fees, which sends a message to school districts who might be contemplating intelligent design. The policy in Dover basically had two parts. Students will be made aware of gaps/problems in Darwin's theory and of other theories of evolution, including but not limited to intelligent design. Students were to be taught intelligent design and also taught that evolution is crappy science. It was a two-part policy. Now, full disclosure here, the National Center for Science Education was an advisor to the plaintiffs' legal team. And we had worked with the plaintiffs to try to keep the school board from passing these policies, and unfortunately we were unable to do so. But when that happened, the only resort was to go to trial. That's the last thing we want to do. You don't go to trial willy-nilly. They're expensive, they're exhausting. That's the last thing you want to do. They would tear up communities. But when you got to. And what you want to do is go in with something like the fact situation in Dover. The defense, which was the school board, which was the pro-intelligent design folk, they had to convince the judge that intelligent design is science, because the way the First Amendment is interpreted is that it's okay, to have something that has some religious implications. That's not so bad, but there has to be a really good secular reason for teaching it. So if intelligent design was science, then there would be a secular reason for teaching it. So even if it was also religion, you could maybe convince the judge to set that aside. They also had to convince the judge that evolution was questionable science, that it was justifiable to question evolution in the public schools because scientists were giving up on evolution. And therefore defending the gaps problems part of the policy. The plaintiffs, which was the side I was on, the pro-evolution, anti-intelligent design side, had the job of showing the judge that intelligent design is religion, definitely, and that there was no valid secular reason for teaching intelligent design because intelligent design does not follow the rules of science. Intelligent design requires going outside of natural causes to bring in a supernatural cause, step one, as well as some other reasons, and because it is factually wrong. Statements made about irreducible complexity, statements made in the book of Pandas and People that they promoted as an intelligent design book were simply wrong and so forth. And of course, one of the things that we wanted to do was show that evolution was very solid science, and we did this. One of the things we wanted to do was tie intelligent design to creation science, because of course the Supreme Court had already ruled that creation science was religion and unconstitutional, so if we could make intelligent design a subset of creation science, we would be ahead from a legal standpoint. And that was surprisingly easy to do. It took a lot of work to dig out the stuff, but loose lips sink ships, I guess. And one of the things that we found was a series of manuscripts of the book of Pandas and People, which was promoted by the school district and promoted by intelligent design proponents as being a statement of intelligent design and suitable for classroom use. The early manuscripts of this book all had a paragraph in it. Creation means the various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator, with their distinctive features already intact. Fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings. This was from the early draft of a book called Biology and Creation, 1986. And in the 1987 Biology and Origins, creation means that the various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator, with their distinctive features already intact, fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings, etc. Now, this manuscript was the first manuscript of the book called Of Pandas and People. Creation means that the various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator, and we have our familiar fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings. This was the missing link. You'll notice the year that this was published was 1987. What else came out in 1987? Edwards versus Aguilar. The Supreme Court case striking down the legality of the teaching of creation science. The second manuscript of Pandas and People changed that wording. Intelligent design means the various forms of life began abruptly through an intelligent agency with their distinctive features already intact. Fish with fins and scales, all together now. Birds with feathers, beaks, and wings. When we showed this to the judge, and they're tracing this paragraph through these manuscripts, and then, oopsie-daisy, all of a sudden creationism morphs into intelligent design. That was a persuasive argument that intelligent design really is viewed by its proponents as a form of creationism. In the Kitzmiller versus Dover decision, the judge wrote, the overwhelming evidence at trial established that ID is a religious view, a mere relabeling of creationism and not a scientific theory. Let me just move on a little bit. Oh, well, right there. To preserve the separation of church and state mandated by the Establishment Clause, we will enter an order permanently enjoining defendants from maintaining the IED policy in any school within the Dover area school district, from requiring teachers to denigrate or disparage the scientific theory of evolution, that's the gaps problems component, and from requiring teachers to refer to a religious alternative theory known as ID. But it's not over after Dover. We anticipate that there may be another trial like Dover, only with a different fact situation. You can go to our website and read all of the transcripts of the trial and the witness statements and the depositions. We have a full court record. And it's clear that the fact situation in Dover did not favor the defendants. The school board members lied to the judge. That's something judges get testy about. It's not usually a good idea. And so they may try to find a cleaner case, so to speak, with less of a paper trail, shall we say. They have tried to recast intelligent design outside of science into, say, the social sciences. I'll give you a quick example of that. And what are called evidence against evolution policies, in which the argument is made, well, teach evolution, but balance it with the evidence against evolution. And there's a number of ways that this kind of argument has been carried out. And academic freedom policies. I'm going to give a quick example of the recasting of intelligent design. In a small Southern California community of El Cajon in December 2005, a course appeared in an intra-session in the high school that was on the philosophy of intelligent design. Now, this seemed very peculiar because usually intelligent design is argued as a science, but this was the philosophy of intelligent design. When citizens in the community, including a geologist who is a member of NCSC, examined this course syllabus, they found that it was just flat creation science. They were talking about young earth arguments and special creation. They just called it intelligent design, and they just called it philosophy. It was particularly poorly thought out, by the way. One of the speakers that was recommended that the teacher who was proposing this intra-session suggestion could come and talk to the class was a man named Francis Crick. Francis Crick does live in the neighboring community, but he had already been dead for 2 years. In Hearst versus Newman, the school district settled and decided never to do that again, and they wouldn't try to teach creationism or creation science. For the evidence against evolution approach, we have a lot of euphemisms like critically analyze the evidence for evolution, present evidence for and against, present the strengths and weaknesses of evolution, present evolution as theory, not fact, teach the full range of views about origins, teach the controversy. There are a lot of these. Basically, what this is, again, is the old contrived dualism, two-model approach, disprove evolution and reprove creation science. It's an old argument that's been around for a long time, but it's becoming rather popular. This kind of legislation is sometimes called academic freedom legislation. It's based on trying to encourage teachers to teach the alleged evidence against evolution, denigrating evolution so that students will conclude that therefore evolution didn't take place, therefore creationism did. Now, there are basically two kinds of laws that are making their rounds, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through each of these kinds of bills, but various states over the past couple of years have proposed these bills, and there really is sort of a, genetic connection between them, sort of a horizontal gene transfer, if you will. Basically, we don't have time to go into them, but the general illustration of them, I think, can be the Louisiana Academic Freedom Act, which, unlike all the other ones, did actually pass in the spring of 2008. These are very clever bills because, first of all, they tend to protect teachers. The idea is a teacher will be protected if a teacher brings in bad science. A teacher will be protected if she brings in creationism. And this is, we even have evidence of this from statements made to newspapers and statements made on the floor of the assembly. This is a way of bringing creationism in. And, oops, wow, what happened there? Excuse me. Here we go. That's really where we're supposed to be. Did that come back up? Yeah. There we go. And students, in this case teachers, the EBGs right away, believe me. Students are protected from bringing in material that basically is unscientific, as the bill says, for subscribing to a particular position on evolution. Well, you don't get graded for subscribing to a position. You get graded on knowing the information. That's really the point here. in this Louisiana law, it prohibits school officials from prohibiting, censoring, or suppressing the content of any material about biological evolution, the chemical origin of life, global warming, and human cloning. Notice that they bundled evolution together with a number of other issues that the religious right is upset about. This was done, we believe, at the behest of the Discovery Institute, which has a book it wants to sell in Louisiana and elsewhere, which is the alleged evidence against evolution. So by having in the bill that you can't prohibit teachers from bringing junk science in, this is a very clever approach. In summary, the evidence against evolution or academic freedom approach attempts to avoid religion. Nothing in those bills that I showed you mentions religion or creationism or anything like that, which they hope to avoid the establishment class. They stress free speech, academic freedom of teachers to bring creationist materials in, although they don't call them creationist materials. Academic freedom of teachers to bring the alleged evidence against evolution in. And then they're protective as well. If a teacher does this, the school district can't tell the teacher to stop, which of course is one of the weaker legal parts of this bill, because you cannot get a get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to the First Amendment. You simply have to follow it. They're permissive bills rather than bills that require the particular action by a teacher, and that's the cleverest part of these bills, because when you're just allowing the teacher to do something, that makes it very difficult to challenge from a legal standpoint. If you have a policy like Dover, where the Dover School Board said, teachers, do that, then you can bring an injunction. You can say, no, if this is done, it's going to cause harm to the students, et cetera, et cetera. If you've got a permissive law, most judges are going to say, well, let's see how this works out. No, I won't give you an injunction. Go find a teacher who's stepping over the line. Find somebody who's got standing to sue in the community, either a student in the class or a student who's going to be in the class. It really raises the bar much, much higher than doing a facial challenge, doing a challenge on the face of the bill. These are called as-applied challenges, and they're a lot more difficult to put together. It's very difficult to find those plaintiffs, number one. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is they often bundle evolution with, as you saw in the Louisiana bill, things like global warming and so forth. They sort of bundle evolution with these other topics, and there's actually a legal reason for doing that as well. Well, you can find out a lot more about this and other things that are going on. Whoops, hello, go back. In the creation. Wow, that was sure quick. Let's try doing that again. There. You can find out a lot more about this if you go to ncseweb.org. We have a Friday news, electronic newsletter that you can sign up for. And I would suggest you go to the news button there at the top of the page, where you'll be taken to this page, and you can search for your state or any other state you're interested in. You can search by year. You can get all the current events, shall we say. And we are a membership organization, so obviously I'm going to encourage you to join as well. My staff, in case you didn't get that website, ncseweb.org. Ben Branch is the deputy director. Many of you get his e-newsletter and have had some correspondence with him. Louise Mead is our education outreach person. Peter Hess, never forget what's his name. Come on, Jeannie. Robert Lund is our communication. Peter Hess is our faith outreach director. And then the three flare-ups rounders, the guys who spend a lot of time giving advice to people like those in Dover and elsewhere. Josh Rosenau, geologist Steve Newton, and Eric Mickle are there to answer your questions and help you understand this controversy. And of course, like all right-thinking people, we are also on Facebook, so be sure to check us out on Facebook. And thank you so much for being patient with all that earlier problem and for hanging in. Actually, give me a hand here. Oh, thank you. And I can come up. Hi.
I mentioned that Dr. Scott mentioned the Dover trial in her speech. We have the good fortune that it was part of this series, post-sponsored by
that's right.
Judge Jones, who was the judge who presided over that trial, will be speaking here in the auditorium in February, so watch for the announcements.
And Ken Miller is an expert witness.
And Francisco Ayala two other very prominent evolutionary biologists who will be speaking on the BYU campus as part of the series as well. We're going to discuss those who need to go to class. I'd like to allow for about 10 minutes of questions for those of you who would like to stay. So let's just take a few minutes for those of you who need to leave, and then we'll go ahead and open up the questions for about 10 minutes or so. Is that okay?
Absolutely. That's perfectly fine.
We feel very fortunate to have such a group of speakers coming and sharing.
Yeah, you got a great one. All of those people are good. I had a few years ago, it was earlier this year, I gave a talk at Appalachian State University, and they were doing a big one, Darwin Fest as well. And I was the first speaker. And they said, we're having Ken Miller and Jim Jones. It's a whole big long list of people. That's really great. And they said, we're going to be doing a T-shirt for the series. And I said, that sounds really cool. So he said, we haven't finished it yet, so we'll send you yours, because I was the first speaker. So what else you ought to do? You ought to put the names of all the speakers on the back of the shirts, like a rock tour. That's a great idea. And the other day I got this really great T-shirt in the mail. Eugenie Scott, February 2nd or something. It was hysterical. It was just really hilarious. But it really was quite a list of people to, I was honored to be on that list.
Well, I had a similar experience. I did a lot of work on governmental in the history, and also the connection with Darwinism, with Darwin. I should say lack of connection. Because Darwin influenced many but Villanova hosted a Middle in the 21st Century Symposium and asked me to give the first speaker.
Congratulations.
That
sounds very nice.
I looked at the list. It was some sort of thing of transformation.
Michael Bruce, he's been doing as
Michael wasn't there, but
Sean Carroll was a regular.
Yeah, Sean Carroll was there, and
who are some of the others?
Evelyn Fox Keller was right after me.
Interesting.
And who's the fellow from Georgetown who was
Jack Hott.
Yeah, just Hott.
John Hott?
John Hott.
Yep. Yeah, he's on my T-shirt too. I think you push it once and then it asks you if you're really serious, and then you push it again.
Okay.
Yes,
I'll start with that.
All right.
Why don't we go ahead and begin with your questions? We'll get the microphone here as well.
Gershert.
I think I heard you on a podcast, and the person was asking you when you had become available, the slides, the presentation that you guys did at the podium. It was really persuasive to the judge.
Some of that is already online. If you go to our website and you go to the legal stuff and you go to Kitzmiller, we do have Kevin Padian's full presentation. It's wonderful. And we got the slide and it's synced with the transcript. Now, we haven't finished. We started doing it, and then we lost some staff, and we really should get back to it. We started doing that with Ken Miller's testimony, too, which was the other big heavy-duty science testimony. And, that's a good reminder for me to kind of go back and flog the staff and see if I can get them to start in again. Because that's really great. I mean, you read his testimony, and it's just terrific. Yes?
Can you comment at all about the Ben Stein movie? Has that increased the popularity of the ID movement? I noticed last night that it's still in the top 100 on the Netflix site. Has that had any influence at all in this debate?
We were very worried about Expelled when we got wind of it. Several months before it was broadcast, before it hit the theaters. We kind of, from the website and from some other sleuthing around that we did, we had an idea that we wanted to be very happy with it. And then, of course, the fact that they lied to so many of us who were asked to appear, that also didn't exactly raise our confidence in the veracity of what was going to be presented. We produced this very thorough ExpelledExposed.com website, which I would recommend to you. And we made those 4 videos, and the videos, if you notice, were kind of cagey, because videos are really expensive. Good videos. Those are good videos. We didn't want it. We didn't know whether expel would be a flash in the pan and be gone. So we didn't want to spend all this money making videos that would be directly tied to expelled, because we'd be stuck with these films that nobody cared about. So we made videos on topics that we thought were important, but which were related to expelled and which would be relevant to expelled. And that was a good choice, because expelled had a great opening weekend. Scared the hell out of us, really. I mean, it was a full documentary that just sold like hotcakes. Well, we kind of expected it would have a great first weekend because of the marketing that was done on it. For those of you who don't know, the same company that marketed Passion of the Christ also marketed Expelled, and they marketed it in the same way. They showed it for 6 months previously to predominantly conservative Christian audiences, and kind of built up enthusiasm and encouraged all of those people to go out and see it again in the movie theaters on the first weekend, because when you get a really good opening weekend, that gives your film legs to go on for several more weekends. So they had a great opening weekend, a not so good second weekend, and a really bad third weekend, and the fourth weekend they might as well have folded the tents and gone home. By 6 weeks it was out of the theaters. It basically, the movie was so bad, you don't have to be a pro-evolution advocate like the folks at NCAC to think this is a crummy movie. The people who review movies for a living said that it was a poorly made movie. It was bombastic and propagandistic, and it was shot, and they needed to have better birds, maybe in many respects. But they just said it was a really, really bad movie and it was wasted time to go, and nobody went. Now, of course, it's DVD sales were next to follow. We tracked that for a while too. The DVD sales had this little blip, and then not a lot. Now it's available on Netflix. Now the scientists who didn't want to pay money to see it before see it on Netflix. I think that's maybe why it's in the top 100. I heard that from so many scientists. Oh, good, I'm going to see it now on free download. I don't think it's made. I think it was a flash in the pan. It's over. Now, it's going to be shown in church basements till the end of time. I mean, it's still going to be, it's still going to be used to try to convince people of how terrible evolution is, and what a horrible racist Darwin was and all that. And pre-Nazi, I like that part of it too. By the way, have any of you heard of the movie Creation with Paul Bettany and Jennifer Connelly? Anybody heard about that? Yeah, Well, this is a brand new movie. Darwin as husband and family man. Who would have thought? Well, Darwin is the really good-looking Paul Bettany too. That's not so. People think of Darwin as this old guy. He's got the big beard, the black coat, and he's kind of looking like. Well, he actually was. He was a young man once, and he was 6 feet tall. He was a good writer. He was a good shot. Why hasn't the NRA picked up on that? I don't know. He ran up mountains, and he traveled all over the world. He was a very healthy, hearty person. That he got sick in the later days, but he was a very different person than what people think of. And he was also an incredibly devoted family man. He had 10 kids. Not all of them survived. It was, after all, the late 19th century, and child mortality was pretty high. He and Emma were devoted to each other. I mean, this was a good guy, right? I think that this movie is really going to change a lot of people's attitudes about Darwin. They never think of Darwin as a human being. Darwin is this cardboard cutout. But this movie really, I've seen it, this movie does present Darwin as a human being, which is unusual, both for the evolution, people who teach evolution as well as the anti-evolutionists. Of course, the movie is called Creation. If you go to creationthemovie.com, you can see the preview. It doesn't have a U.S. distributor at this point. It has a distributor in the UK. It opened the Toronto International Film Festival last week. It has distributors virtually every place else in the world. It doesn't have a distributor in the U.S. I wonder why. Sir?
There's actually a petition that people can sign to get a distributor. I think it's
It's a Facebook site.
also American Humanists.
Oh, they're starting it too? Yeah. Well, there's a Facebook site, Bring Creation to the U.S., I think is what it's called. So, yeah, there's obviously religious indignation about that. I mean, you've got two A-list Hollywood actors, right? An Academy Award winner, and you can't, it's extremely well done. Excellent costuming, excellent lighting. It's a very, the script follows Randall Keynes' book, Annie's Box, and it focuses on the relationship of Charles and Emma and their terrible grief over the death of the 10-year-old daughter Emma, of Alice. Thank you. Annie, who was, she was Darwin's favorite daughter. They were very, very close, and it just devastated both of them. And there's plenty of historical. And the guy that got to play Hooker is a dead ringer. It's amazing. You look at these old pictures of Hooker and you look at this actor and you think, Huxley not so good, but Hooker's good. Also, you can never have two Darwin biopics. On Tuesday, the 6th of October, there's a 2-hour Nova movie on Darwin and Emma. Tis the season, right? You can go to the Nova site and you can see that trailer too.
Let's take a couple more questions, and then if you want to wait till after, we need to let some people go. And so, a couple more questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes, a rather disturbing proportion of registered voters in this country actually believe that the president was born in Kenya. This is in spite of that thing called facts.
20% thinks he's the Antichrist.
There's a birth certificate, there are actual eyewitnesses who saw him, who knew his mother or saw him growing up as a child.
Yeah.
And so we have a real cultural dissonance here where facts really don't mean anything in the face of a really strong cultural, emotional stream in American cultural life. And a lot of your talk was about establishing facts. It's like playing whack-a-mole. When you get what deeper strategies do you have to actually eliminate the root causes of this really deep-seated stream of ignorance in this country?
This is one, we are a tiny little pipsqueak nonprofit. We can't do it all by ourselves. One of the things, the quick answer to yours is two things. One reason why I have an education specialist, because part of this is better job teaching evolution, and that's you guys, okay? The college-level scientists have to do a heck of a lot better job teaching evolution than they have been, because the high school teachers don't understand it, and then the trickle-down only gets worse. And the second thing is mainstream clergy. They have to get on board, too. There's this tendency for Catholics and mainstream Protestants, for the leaders, the priests and the ministers, and the rabbis, it's like Ronald Reagan, never speak ill of a fellow Democrat, never speak ill of a fellow Christian. They disagree completely with the special creationist theology, but they're going to be nice guys about it. They're not going to say, we disagree, we have a different Christian theology, we accept evolution. Until that happens, we're going to have, the noisiest people are, of course, the biblical literalists, who are the most vehemently anti-evolution. We need to, ultimately education is the solution. The bigger question of the way I'd cast what you're talking about is when ideology trumps empirical evidence, we have a problem. The example you gave of Obama is one example of that. The example I gave of the resistance of people to look at the arguments of the scientists against the creation science or intelligent design people is another example of that. We can all come up with lots of examples. We all have ideologies. Ideology itself is not bad. We live by our ideologies, and they can be very positive. But you have to be clear-eyed about your ideologies. I'm an environmentalist, okay? I have an ideology of environmentalism. Ists and isms, those are ideologists. I have to try to be clear-eyed about things like clear-cutting. Sometimes clear-cutting is appropriate. I need to listen to the foresters when they're talking about that. You can't let your ideology override the empirical evidence that's being presented to you. And this is a real problem. I think it's exacerbated by the kind of communication we have. Because of the atomization of communication. You never have to hear a point of view different from yours. You just find that cable channel that has your point of view, and you don't have to listen to anything else. You can just get all of your prejudices reinforced. That can apply to when I was young. That actually wasn't the case. There was network news, and you sort of got this fairly balanced kind of view, and you didn't get the hysterical kind of goofball stuff like you get on TV today. So yeah, it's an uphill struggle to try to encourage more of a critical thinking perspective among our fellow citizens. Because alas, each of those nutcases out there has one vote. How many do you have? There was a hand back there, that gentleman in the back. Yes, gray shirt.
I think it was the ICR. What do you know about their push to try and be able to get PhD level degrees? Is that
They've never argued for PhD level degrees. What's going on now, this is the Institute for Creation Research, which moved from California to Texas, and has a master's degree granting program as part of their school. And they're arguing with the state of Texas right now over basically licensure. Can they be licensed to grant these degrees? It's not the same thing as accreditation. That's completely different. It's very unlikely that their degrees would ever get accredited. Currently, the way this stands is that the state of California, the state of Texas, has said, we will grant you a license to grant degrees in creation science, but we will not grant you a license to grant degrees in biology or astrophysics or geology, because you do not teach standard scholarship. You teach this very bizarre kind of scholarship, and it would be doing an injustice to the citizens of Texas to grant you the same status as the University of Texas at Austin. So, and now the ICR is sued to try to get that wording overturned. So, watch our website. We will report on that.
Thank you. Again, let's give Eugenie.
Thank you.